Kia ora. This is Chris talking about the Essentials tag. So the first tag is what three books best define your style. So probably Metamorphosis and Other Stories by Franz Kafka. This really just defines the feeling of modern alienation, and Kafka is or was one of the geniuses of language and really just wrote some pretty mind-bending stories, and it's incredible what he can do with grammar. And then this is a recent edition, would be The Book of Disquiet by Fernando Pessoa. The Book of Disquiet is another piece of modernism, and it really just takes you into the head of Bernardo Soares, who is a assistant bookkeeper in Lisbon, and this is just essentially just a bunch of his thoughts, and how he goes about his life, his thoughts on dreaming, his thoughts on the unconscious, his thoughts on torpor in his life, and the various ups and downs of it. This is probably my most recent favorite book. I think that question's coming up. And then the last book that really defines my style is Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce. So all of my friends know that I'm obsessed with this book, and it is quite unlike anything else, and it's not something you just pick up and read once and then you're done with it. You know, this is a book to really soak into your consciousness and how it plays with language and all the things it does with language. It's quite an incredible work, but it's also one of the ones that it rewards you for keep on consistently reading it and keep on engaging with it. There's a lot of layers to this text that you don't really get on initial readings, and it also is this text is the experience of learning another language or another several languages, because it's not just written in English. There are parts of this book that are in other languages and made up languages and combinations of different languages. It does mostly stick to European centric languages, this novel, but it works for the style of story that James Joyce was telling. And it took him 17 years to write this. So this is probably my favorite book and most defining book about me. So the next one is a favorite classic and contemporary. So for favorite classic, I went and I was thinking what are sort of like classics. So this is a late medieval text, Inferno by Dante, and it's essentially an epic poem about hell, and it's quite an influential book. I know that at universities they often teach this as kind of like their most recent thing in the in classics courses, because it does take place, or it was written in the late medieval period, which is significantly after antiquity, but before the Renaissance, and really before modern literature or anything like that. So it's also the history of this, the narrative of this story really does tie directly into the more sort of mythological narratives of antiquity. So yeah, it's quite like this one. And then favorite contemporary book, probably We Do Not Part by Han Kang. This is probably my favorite one that I've read recently, and I don't read that much contemporary compared to classics, but this one was very impactful. It was very it opened my eyes in many ways, and I really did feel like I experienced the the story on quite a few different levels. Yeah, it was it was a very eye-opening experience, and I'm looking forward to reading anything else by this author. So that's that. Favorite book I've read this year. So this is the Book of Disquiet. I've already talked about it, but this was my favorite read of this year. Let's see what else. Longest book I've read. So the longest book I've read is probably this copy of Ulysses, which is almost 900 pages. If we're counting multi-volume books, then probably A Storm of Swords by J.R. Tolkien. Not J.R. Tolkien, George R. R. Martin. Sorry, that was a slip. George R. R. Martin's A Storm of Swords, if we're counting multi-volume books. But if we're counting single volumes, this restored text of Ulysses. The pages are quite thick, so it's not actually as many pages as it looks like, but still a lot. They definitely managed to find a lot of additional content to add into the story. Ulysses was, before Finnegan's Wake, my favorite story, and I still really, really like it, and I'm still going to come back to it regularly, but it's been edged out slightly by the more sort of experimental modernist work, although Ulysses is fairly experimental. If you're not a big, like really big into modernism and like more experimental works, I recommend Ulysses over Finnegan's Wake any day of the week. It's much more accessible work. It's still complicated and it's still challenging, and there are still parts that are difficult to decipher, but it is a lot more accessible and it's a book that I feel like anyone with a decent reading level can pick up and get through, although there will be parts that are challenging. But yeah, it's, James Joyce was pretty good. Next thing is, what do I most want to read? My favorite genre book is next. Probably Berserk by Kentaro Miura. So, this is both manga and fantasy. So I guess it's a genre in two different aspects. And it's sort of representing my love for manga and also fantasy as well. But I feel like Berserk is incredibly dark, incredibly violent, but it is an incredible story, and it's the art in this is gorgeous. So some of the pages are, or not some, but most pages just are like pieces of artwork that you could put in a museum. They're really, really good stuff, especially some of the more kind of demonic depictions. It's incredible what this artist does, what Kentaro Miura did. So that's that. Now, what do I want to read? I want to read the Iliad, translated by Emily Wilson. This is a book that has recently come onto my radar, and I've picked up a copy, and I've read a little bit of the Iliad, but I think I need to go through and I need to read the introduction by Emily Wilson to really get into the text. I believe she writes a really good introduction, so I shouldn't sleep on that. Sometimes people give you advice not to read introductions, and for some texts, an introduction does spoil the text, and the text is better off just speaking for itself. But with a text like the Iliad, I feel like you really need to kind of be eased into the ancient world of antiquity, or even pre-antiquity. The Iliad is old. It is very old. It's like one of the oldest Greek stories that we have. And I've heard a lot of good things about Emily Wilson's translation, and I've seen interviews where Emily Wilson's talked about it. And she seems like a really interesting person, and it seems like she really knows the text back to front. So yeah, anything but fiction. Pure Invention by Matt Alt, which is a book about Japanese pop culture and how Japan gained so much soft power in the West and in the rest of the world. It's really good for talking about Japanese culture in the 40s, not the 40s, the 50s, 60s, and 70s and 80s. Just the second half of the 20th century. It's really good for showing what Japan was doing culturally in those times, and also what parts of Japanese culture exported across, and the different things that happened. It also talks about kind of watershed moments in Japanese pop culture, stuff like Pokemon and karaoke and stuff like that. So yeah, it's a really, really good book. I feel like the end of this book, where it talks about the 2000s and 2010s, was a little weak compared to when I was talking about the 80s and 90s. But it was still a good read, and really opened my eyes up to that side of things. And then a book that I'm currently reading is The Miho Tree by Janet Frame. So, The Miho Tree. So, this is it's a work that Janet Frame wrote. It says in the back, she wrote in 56 and 57 during her time in Ibiza. It's a famous New Zealand author, but this wasn't published until quite recently, and it's more or less like a fable. The font's quite big. There's a lot of image on the page, so there's not a lot of text per page, but it's sort of like a vaguely allegorical story, and it's a fable. So it's about a little metal seed, which is moved away from her home, and how the challenges she encounters in growing up and stuff like that. Very, very interesting. I think this is probably going to be the first full Janet Frame work I'm going to have read, and I'm glad it's the first one. It's quite good, quite eases you into this author's style. Yeah, and then I think I just have Norwegian Wood. No, not Norwegian Wood. That's A Wild Sheep Chase. I think I wanted to talk about this book, but I don't think I think I grabbed it, but then I didn't have any questions for it. So I think it's just the book I like. Yeah, that's the video. So cheers.